and this is about identifying unmet needs. And we've got three, I think, very good speakers who are going to come at this from some different perspectives. The process will be that there will be presentations, and they will be quite short and succinct presentations. I suggest that we have some questions and positions of accuracy after each particular presentation, and then I'd quite like to go into a general discussion which will be about unmet needs generally, and then people can talk about the presentations and bring in their own experience, and we can hopefully have a dialogue that will benchmark where we are and then hopefully give us some thoughts about how we challenge some of the blocks in the system. I'd be grateful if people would turn their mobile phones to silent so that we've got everybody's attention in the room. I don't intend to make any introductory remarks because I think the presentations will very much speak for themselves. But one of the things I do want to say is that there is a lot of need out there, and a lot of it is really unmet need. And if we're not careful, that unmet need is not included in any thought in terms of planning and developing services. So I think we need to remind ourselves that there is need that is met and there is need that is known, and there's a huge amount of very unmet need. Our first speaker is Dr. Margaret Blake from Ipsos Mori. So Margaret, I'll offer the floor to you.
So I'm going to talk about unmet need for social care and what factors predict it developing and links with well-being. I'm from Ipsos Mori, but what I'm going to present is analysis that was done with NatSen, and colleagues at NatSen did much of the analysis, and we're doing the project in collaboration with Independent Age and Age UK. So I've got a short presentation, so it's going to be really top-level findings, but if you're interested in more detail, there is a published report which you can get on the Ipsos Mori websites or the NatSen websites, and my collaborators Alison, Rosella and Karine have been involved in writing this report, but they couldn't be here today. It's NIHR funded, but it's our research. They don't have to take any responsibility. I think everyone already knows the background to all this. It's been discussed in previous presentations today. An ageing population, time of austerity, other cost pressures on delivering care services, and pressures on families providing unpaid care. And the Care Act 2014 is an important context for the research. It brings in a national eligibility framework for assessing care needs and whether they should be met, and a focus on the needs of carers as well as users, a focus on prevention of care needs developing, and an interest in the impacts of care needs and unmet need on well-being. So the aim of this project is to look at unmet need for older people who live in their own homes. So it's not concerned with care homes, it's people who live in their own homes. And there were 4 aims of the project: to look at the nature of unmet need and the characteristics of those with unmet need. So how do we define unmet need? And I decide who is experiencing unmet need, to find out what the prevalence is among older people, and then to do some modelling analysis to look at the factors which predict unmet need developing in the future. So not what predicts people developing care needs, but what predicts those needs being unmet, and then analysis looking at the links between unmet need and well-being. So there were 2 parts to the study. Secondary analysis of existing data from ELSA and the Health Survey for England, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. The second part is in-depth interviews with older people to answer some of the questions that have been raised by the first part, and also to explore people's own unmet need as expressed by people rather than defined by our data. And I won't be presenting that because that research is ongoing. So I should say that the data were collected in between 2011 and 2013, so it's before the CARE Act came into force. So the context in which the data were collected is different from now. However, we can still draw on those experiences. So we used ELSA data, which is a longitudinal study and enables you to look at people's situations in the past and every 2 years up to the latest wave in wave 6 in the data we use, which is 2012 to 2013. And we focused on people aged 65 plus. And then Health Survey for England, which is a cross-sectional study. And together with colleagues at PSSRU and University of East Anglia, we developed a social care module for ELSA and the Health Survey for England to identify whether people had difficulties with activities of daily living, instrumental activities of daily living and mobility, to see whether people had help with those needs, who provided any help they got, how often and when, and who pays for the care. And so these data were developed, these questions were developed in 2009-10 and then have been included on the surveys for several years or waves. So we now have the data to find out what they're showing us. So the first part of the project was to define unmet need. So what level of need should be considered as being an eligible need, which you could then decide whether or not it's met or unmet. And we're constrained by the data from these two surveys, where we have information on ADLs, IADLs and mobility. The CARE Act also includes the idea of whether people's needs have a significant impact on well-being, and those surveys also allow us to look at that. And then once we've identified whether someone has a need, how do we decide whether it's met? What can be considered as meeting the needs? So care from professional care and support workers, help from family and friends, but is there a point at which so much care is needed that it in effect reflects an unmet need, and the extent to which aids and adaptations can meet people's needs. So we had discussions both with Independent Age and Age UK and various other stakeholders to see how we should define unmet need. And in the end, we decided we needed two definitions. So one relates to the Local Authority or CARE Act framework. So it tries to mimic whether needs are eligible under the definition of the CARE Act, and then whether those needs are met. And then separately to look at whether people will be eligible for financial support, but then a wider definition that has less stringent criteria, so people may be at the early stages of developing needs that wouldn't qualify as eligible under the CARE Act, but they're still important in understanding those needs. And also in that definition we included the idea that aids and adaptations could meet needs. So we've ended up with two definitions. The first one, the qualifying level of need has difficulties with 3 or more ADLs, or 2 ADLs with a significant impact on well-being. And then if they receive no care, or the care doesn't meet all their needs, or it's met but by 20 or more hours of unpaid care from a single source, that's regarded as unmet need. And this definition has been used for analysis, which is in the report, showing the extent to which people who have eligible needs under the CARE Act had their needs met at those times and how that relates to finances. But I'm not presenting that today, but it's in the report. And then the wider definition, which has been used for the analysis I'll present today, is a broader definition where if you have at least one ADL difficulty or 2 non-ADLs and you don't receive care for each of them, you have unmet need. So the first regression analysis was to look at people who took part in ELSA did not have any needs in wave 1, but by wave 6 had needs, and to look at whether there are any factors at wave 1 that predicted them developing unmet need in the future. So we looked at some things which remain unchanged, and some things which are circumstances at wave 1, and then events such as widowhood that occur between them. And the outcome measure is the wider definition of unmet need. And we included a lot of covariates in the analysis, socio-demographic and economic, health-related about their illness or particular conditions, health-related behaviour, and some social inclusion measures, thinking we would find what kind of factors predict it, and therefore you could say improves the situation on these things and unmet need will be reduced. But we found relatively few things predicted unmet need. Some of them were surprising. So those who were relatively younger at the first point in time and did not have a long-standing illness at wave 1 were more likely to have developed unmet need. Not more likely to have developed care needs, but more likely that the care needs they had were unmet. And those who lived alone or had been widowed during the period, which is less surprising, were more likely to have unmet need. And one question is whether it's people who had less severe needs, whose needs were unmet according to our definitions. But we also found that it was people with ADL difficulties were more likely to have their needs unmet. We didn't find, thank you, we didn't find that being socially isolated or having unhealthy health behaviours in the past contributed to unmet need, not things that you can do things about. It's younger people who perhaps are less involved in the health system, or where the needs have just developed and they haven't had time to adapt, that have developed needs which are unmet. But this has raised a lot of unanswered questions rather than answering things. So we then also looked at the impact of unmet needs on well-being over time. So people whose needs are unmet, how does the development of their well-being over time compare with those whose needs were met? So this involved looking at data from all the waves of ELSA, and the outcome measure is well-being, and we used CASP 15, which is a measure of quality of life specifically for older people, with 4 domains. And the covariates were an adapted wider definition of unmet need, and then lots of other controlling factors to look at whether people whose needs are unmet, it has an impact on their well-being. But what we found was having unmet needs had no significant impact on well-being overall. So as people got older, their well-being declined, but the pattern of that was not different for people who had unmet needs compared to those with met needs. What was more important was the number of difficulties someone had, rather than whether those difficulties were unmet, and there was an association with wealth. So our conclusions were surprising in some ways. Firstly, unsurprisingly, unmet need can be defined in a number of ways, and you can't really have a single measure of unmet need. It depends how you define it, what you include and what you count as needs. And there are few clear predictors of developing unmet need, and we found no clear association between unmet need and well-being, which raises more questions than it answers. So is unmet need a temporary state of adjustment? So those younger people their needs have developed, and they still need to get together the context in which their needs are met? Or is the lack of predictors of unmet need a fact that everyone has unmet need because there's such pressure on the system that regardless of people's situation, their needs go unmet? The findings in relation to well-being have raised the question of whether actually receiving care could adversely affect well-being in some cases. The measures of quality of life have dimensions such as autonomy and self-identity, so receiving care could potentially impact on those while having other positive impacts on other aspects of well-being? Does actually coping with difficulties and managing have some beneficial impact even alongside the negative impact? And people have talked about the assets-based approach, where the focus is on what you can do rather than what you can't do. So maybe the idea of the ADL, what you can do, what difficulties you have and whether you've got help, goes against that. And then the whole question of how we've called it the local authority or the Care Act definition, how do our measures compare with what's actually happening in practice? Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. That was, I think, a very clear presentation. Do people have questions for Margaret? And if you do, please will you identify who you are and make questions as concise as possible, please, because we are quite constrained on time. Gentleman here.
Hi, my name's Pete Billman and I'm a Care Act trainer and consultant. I've had quite a long conversation with Margaret earlier. I didn't manage to ask all my questions. My question is, given that the way in which needs are defined by the Care Act, as far as its local authority's duty, to meet all the person's eligible needs, it's a question of going forward how we look at what unmet needs might be. I wondered whether Margaret had any thoughts about the reference made in the recent Communities and Local Government report on adult social care, where it talked about under-met need.
Yes. Well, in relation to this research, there is a question of whether unmet need is all your needs going unmet or just some of them. But also needs might be met, but not in the way you want them to be, or not in the way that maybe enhances your well-being. So I think that's important, and I think in the qualitative research we can look at that, but also look at whether there are other needs which need to be met, which are not measured in this approach. So I think this is a very much, you have needs, are they met or are they not? But it's more complex than that. Needs may be undermet or there are other needs.
I just take two questions together and then I'm afraid we have to move on. So gentleman there and then gentleman there.
Raphael Wittenberg at LSC. Margaret, you mentioned the issue of coping, I think, towards your final comment. I'm just wondering whether you felt that implied that the direction of causation or travel could be the other way around in some cases, that people who subjectively, on answering CAS questions, say that their well-being is good in effect, are those people who therefore perhaps didn't ask for help or didn't accept it if it was offered, that this is that the type of mechanism you have in mind?
Potentially, but in fact the same measure of CAS was included in the other analysis looking at what predicts unmet need, and there wasn't an association. So we didn't find that well-being 10 years before impacted on unmet need in the future. So I think it's more the question of whether the act of having to cope has benefits in terms of independence and identity.
And final question on this section.
Alan Brennan from University of Sheffield, alumnus of LSC and happy to be in the alumni theatre. It was a similar question really. It was whether the statistical models had accounted for the fact that there's causality in both directions, that your uptake or access to need is related to severity, either explained by the observed variables or unexplained somehow, and vice versa, or whether I'm not an expert, but you can do structural equation modelling that goes in both directions, or you can just see it, as I usually do, that X causes Y.
Yes. In the first analysis, the technique that was used couldn't predict causality, you couldn't predict the direction of it, except by using wave 1 variables as the input on the situation at wave 6, it kind of increases the chance that you're looking at the causes of unmet need. Though for factors which are kind of stay the same, it's not necessarily the case. The second one, I have to say, I did not do the modelling myself, and the person who did couldn't be here. But my understanding is that the particular technique used does allow you to say something about the direction of the causality because of the way it was done. I can tell you the precise name of it. I'll pick you up.
That's great, Margaret. Thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is Dr. Kate Baxter, and Kate's from the University of York, and she's been looking at the information needs of self-funders. And through that, she's created a film and a leaflet. So we're looking forward to hearing from you and also to seeing your film.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's not just me, there's also Emily, who's up there on the top, and Yvonne, who's over here. So yeah, this project is about self-funders' experiences of seeking information about social care. And we have two outputs from the project. One is a leaflet here, Getting Informed, Getting Prepared, First Steps to Finding Care and Support for Older People. And there's copies on the table at the top, and Emily's got some copies as well, so you can pick one of those up if you like. And the other output is a film, which I'm going to show you later. And in this project, we interviewed self-funders and their relatives, and also the people from the organisations that they went to look for information about care. We also ran 2 workshops with our participants to get their views on the what they thought should be the content and the format of the leaflet and the film. So what I'm going to cover today, very briefly, is key findings from the project, some of our experiences of making film. Then I'm going to show you the film, and if we have time, just a little bit on what we plan for dissemination. So, key findings. We found that self-funders and their relatives found it really challenging to find information about social care. They didn't know where to start, they didn't know what questions to ask, they didn't know who to ask. They went to a wide range of information sources, which included local councils, care providers, GPs, voluntary organisations, friends and family, and paper and internet resources. Not everybody knew about or accessed all of those resources. Most people didn't have the time to go to more than 1 or 2. Practitioners also felt constrained in the time that they had available to provide information to self-funders, and that often resulted in practitioners signposting the self-funders somewhere else to get information, which had the impact on the self-funders of making them feel like they were being passed from pillar to post all the time and not actually getting any nearer to the information that they needed. What they actually wanted, the self-funders and the relatives, was a personalised steer, tailored information that would actually be specific to them. What they got was generic information that they then had to wade through to pick out the bits that were useful for them. Practitioners did try to provide and hoped that they were providing information to the self-funders in the hope of empowering the self-funders by making them more aware of the choices and the types of care options that were out there. But sometimes that could have the impact of overwhelming people with information, especially if it contained a lot of jargon. And it's important to remember here that to you and me, certain terms like adult social care and like self-funder make sense, but to the general public out there, they mean absolutely nothing. So we asked our participants what they felt would help with these challenges, and both self-funders and practitioners said that simple information just on taking those first steps so people know where to go will be really helpful. And that's what we've tried to do by creating the leaflet and the film. So just a few examples of our experiences of making the film. We teamed up with the TV department at the University of York to make the film. And our contact there, our film director, was a guy called Patrick. And we explained to Patrick what the participants in the workshop had said they wanted, and that was that they wanted snippets of different people's experiences of what it was like seeking information about social care. Now Patrick said, actually with a short film, we were aiming at 5 minutes, we've got a 7-minute film, with a short film, just have a single storyline. If it's too bitty, too disjointed, people won't connect with it properly and they won't understand. So we thought that was fine, we can have a single storyline, but you know, out of the 40 interviews that we did with self-funders and their relatives, there was only one person who had a positive storyline and had been to 4 or 5 different organisations. Most people had only been to 1 or 2 organisations or had a fairly negative experience at some point. Luckily for us, a lady was called Heather, our participant, and she agreed to take part, thank goodness, because we didn't have a plan B. So she agreed to take part, and she spoke about her experiences of seeking information about home care for her husband Harold. And this is a picture of filming going on in Heather's house. We filmed in her house, and then we also filmed in the care home and in the GP's office, and we had 2 actors as well as Heather in the film. Now it was 4 months between Heather agreeing to take part in the film and actual filming day, and during that time her husband Harold decided that he didn't want to feature in the film. He was happy for Heather to go ahead, and she was still happy to go ahead, but there wouldn't be Harold. Now when we told this to Patrick, that's our film director, he was beside himself with grief really. He was, he said, and this was only a few days before the film, he said, we can't do it then. We cannot have a film about Harold without Harold being in the film. So we thought about this and we thought actually the film is not about Harold. The film is about Heather. It's about Heather seeking information about care for Harold. So the fact that Harold isn't in the film, for us as researchers, wasn't an issue. But for Patrick, the film director, he had this vision of how he saw the film. So for him, it was very difficult to go ahead. He would rather we cancelled and found somebody else. But we did go ahead, and I think he was happy with it in the end. We certainly were. Filming on the day went brilliantly, and that's because of the organisation of the TV department. After the event, when we started to put things together, things were still going fine. But with the first draft of the film that we saw, the images of Heather were all bright and colourful and lovely. The images of the 2 actors in the film were all a little bit dark and a little bit dulled, and looked actually a little bit quite sinister. The reason for this, Patrick, who has worked in TV and documentaries and stuff, he was saying that's standard practice to differentiate between what's real and what's acting. So in documentaries, the tone is dulled with what's not real. But we had to persuade him again to lift that colour a little bit, because this was supposed to be it's a positive film about social care, not something that might make people feel a little bit nervous. And my final comment on making the film, it's a 7-minute film, and in the earlier drafts, a whole minute of the film had images of in the GP's office. So even though the narrator was talking about adult social care and about local councils, the images were of a GP. Now, to Patrick, the film director, he thought he was quite happy with this, because his view was, well, isn't that where people go to find out about social care? They go see their GP. And yes, they do, but that's not the best place to go. And we didn't want the film to be suggesting that the GP was the right place to go for information about social care. So we sorted that out, and that's fine. There's not so much of a GP now. But it just made us, reminded us really, of the lack of awareness of the general public, which Patrick, our film director, is one, the lack of awareness about what social care is and how different health and social care are. And it also reminded us about how useful, hopefully, our leaflet and our film will be. So, if technology works, I'm going to show you the film available. I've no idea how much time I've got left, but
you've lost
am I
it,
done?
I'm afraid.
Right, okay, right. In that case, we're going to let everybody know about it, one way or another, and that's our details if you want to get in touch.
Well, thanks very much for that. And I think 2 take-home messages for me. One is the difficulty of getting information to self-funders, and the other is the difficulty of working with precious lovies in the department of television. But thank you very much for that, Kate, and also to Emily and Yvonne. And there are, as they said, examples of their leaflets here, so I would urge people to take those. I think that really showed that there is a difficult challenge around getting people the right information at times of crisis in their lives. Our next speaker, Jane Madison, is going to talk about the invisible workforce, and the workforce that she's particularly interested in is the personal assistants that are working with disabled people as their employees. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm well aware I'm the only thing that's standing now between you and going home. So let's hope we can make this next few minutes interesting. So this is another school project that's happening at the University of York, and it's a project that's ongoing. So we're just finishing the data collection on this project and starting the analysis. So I don't have findings to share with you, but a very strong theme that's come out of, around this piece of work, which is around PAs that support disabled people when disabled people are at work, is the invisibility of this group as a workforce and in the work that they do. So that's really what I want to focus on and share with you today. Some of the dimensions of that invisibility, some of the potential consequences of it, and if we've time at the end, it'd be good to get your thoughts about that. It's not just me that works on this. My colleagues Katie Graham and Jenny Brooks work on this project, who very unkindly both gone on holiday, and Yvonne also has some involvement in it too. So what I'm going to talk about first of all is clarify who is this group of workers that we're talking about and why we need to talk about them. I'll then say a little bit about invisibility in terms of the bigger picture, in terms of this group of PAs as a workforce. So a little bit more, just briefly really, about what the project is that we're doing, and then what that's telling us, a bit of a flavour of what that's telling us about invisibility more at the micro level, so that as these relationships are played out between disabled people and PAs in the workplace. So, who are we talking about? Well, it's a paid workers who support a physically disabled person in their workplace. So this is our research is focusing specifically on people who have a physical disability or sensory impairment. That's the group we're looking at, as there hasn't been any previous research on this kind of support for them at work. What we discovered in the course of our research is that these workers come under a variety of names that you can see here. The one I've highlighted in bold is the one that we've decided to use for the purposes of our project, which is a workplace PA, but they have all these other names. And interestingly, the workers themselves are sometimes in a bit of a dilemma as to what they want to call themselves. And it's an early indication, really, of the invisibility of this workforce, because there isn't a common definition as to how they're referred to. So what is it that they do? Well, essentially, their role is to enable the disabled person to do his or her job. That's what they're there to do. And we were told over and over again that each workplace PA's job is unique, because each disabled person has different needs and a different job, and they will seek to mould and shape the role of that person around that. I suppose, though, we can say that the scope of their role could fall into sort of three categories. So some people need support at work only with work-related tasks. So an example I could give you from our research is a lawyer who we spoke to, and she's blind. Her organisation has a bespoke computer system for logging and managing their legal cases. So she needed someone with computer skills who could input the information on her cases. That person also helps her with things like managing her online diary. Another example is a man who runs a small consultancy company. He's got cerebral palsy, and his workplace PA interprets his speech and does his typing. She drives him to meetings. She takes notes at the meetings that he goes to. Those kinds of tasks. Other people don't need any work, particularly with work-related tasks, but they need ongoing sort of personal care. So an example here, they need personal care wherever they are. So an example here is a team leader we spoke to. She works in IT support. She's got an adapted workplace, but she needs someone with her because she requires support at meal times, when using the toilet, and for reapplying medical dressings. So she has a different sort of type of need. And then there are people who have those personal care needs wherever they are, but also need someone to support them with the work-related tasks as well. So a bit of a dual role, if you like. Some people who are in that situation feel it's vital to have the same people supporting them in their workplace as who support them outside the workplace, while other people feel exactly the opposite. So there's no hard and fast rule. And why is it important to talk about these workers? Well, here's two good reasons. So this first quote is from the man I referred to just now, who runs his own consultancy company, the man with cerebral palsy. So he said if he didn't have this workplace PA support, he wouldn't be doing that. He'd be at home watching daytime telly. And then here's a wider point that was made to us as well. If disabled people want sheer equality, they must become part of the workforce, and it's going to need an army of PAs to achieve that. So where's this invisible army of people going to come from? I mean, the latest figures just around people in employment show that while around 79% of non-disabled people are in employment, that falls to 49% of disabled people. So there are an awful lot of people who, if they wish to work or were pushed in that direction, would need this kind of support to do it. So it's not just about making adaptations to equipment, it's about some people need a person. And the thing to bear in mind really is that workplace setting, it presents some unique challenges with personal assistance because the tasks that are done there can be very different, the environment is different, and the relationships that a disabled person has in their workplace are different to the ones they have outside of work. And that's something that we feel hasn't really been thought about. In terms of invisibility writ large, the trouble with these workplace PAs, they kind of fall down a crevice or they straddle this boundary between social care and employment support, both of whom sort of acknowledge that there might be a need for this kind of support, but then don't take it very far. So, for instance, in the Care Act, of course, work is seen as part of well-being, and the well-being principle should be what guides adult social care. And it's very explicitly said that a PA role can include support at work. But when you follow that through and you look at the kinds of guidance and toolkits that are out there around PAs, for example, the stuff that Skills for Care has, some of that is indeed relevant to these workers because there are some principles and practices about working with PAs, whoever they are. But it goes silent then about the specifics and what's different about being in the workplace. And then towards the end of last year, the Improving Lives Green Paper, that looked at work, health and disability, spoke about trying to narrow this disability employment gap that I've just been mentioning. And there is a DWP scheme, Access to Work, that's been going since the 90s, but the department's own evaluation has called it the government's best kept secret. And a House of Commons committee last year found that it still needs a lot more active promotion, particularly among employers who might take on disabled people if they knew they could bring with them this kind of support. And I think that flows through into the kind of focus and attention that support organisations have around this area and in research. So we haven't really given this area much attention. So when we've talked to support organisations, They talk about having PA registers, trying to match people up with PAs, but it's all around what people need in their home and in their leisure time, going out and about, but not about work. So our project, being the first in this field, it's a modest qualitative project. What we wanted to do was talk primarily with these PAs and the disabled people they work for about their roles, about what actually happens, what sort of tasks do these people do, how do disabled people fund this kind of PA support, what are the career paths of these PAs, how do they end up in these sort of jobs, what do they think about them, where might they go next, what would make it easier to have a workplace PA. And so we've done that through interviewing. And while I sip this water, you can see on that sheet who we've worked with. We've still got a few interviews to do. We've done just over 40 interviews, mainly with PAs and disabled people, and usually with, interviewing them separately, but as a pair, so we have two perspectives, rather twin perspectives. It's quite, that would be a whole other paper to tell you about how to recruit people to a study when they're a hidden workforce, so I won't talk about that now. But we're really pleased with the range we got. So I've already told you about a lawyer, a consultant, an IT support person. So we've spoken to people in academia, people in the performing arts, a learning support assistant. So a whole range of different jobs that disabled people are doing with the support of these PAs. And also different ways of funding. But most people have funded either through access to work or through direct payments, where they're taking people into work who they already have. A couple of other sneaky ways of doing things that I probably shouldn't say out loud. And we've talked to people who are in full-time employment, part-time employment, self-employment, so a nice range. When we brought all the findings together, we also have in mind to develop what I've termed guidance in inverted commas there, because we don't know what it is yet, but we want to work with people to produce something that is actually going to help them in practice. What is it that people are telling us they will find useful to work together in this way? So, okay then, give you a flavour of what we're finding then. What we find talking to these people, that it's a hidden workplace within a workplace. So a workplace PA, as someone says, they exist, but they don't exist. And this presents this quite problematic at different levels. So for the organisation, typically a workplace PA isn't employed by the organisation that's employing the disabled person. So it's quite a weird social position to be in an organisation. There aren't really any rules or codes of behaviour of how you work with these people. Their role might be very poorly understood. Employers we've talked to have tended to stand back completely. So no one addresses the issues of, do these people have swipe cards? Do they have induction? Are they insured? Do they know what to do when the fire alarm goes off? You know, all those kinds of things that happen when you're part of an organisation. How do colleagues know how to relate to you? PAs themselves are quite conflicted because they're present in the organisation, but for them to be feeling like they're doing a good job, they have to filter themselves out. It's not their job. They haven't got a post in the organisation. They're facilitating a disabled person to meet the requirements of their post. And also, for the disabled person who's got a PA, there's some invisible work they've got to do. As somebody said, well, I've got 2 jobs in one day. So they've got their own job to do, and then they've got to think about, okay, what am I telling my PA they've got to do? When are they going to do that? If there's gaps when I don't need them, how do they fill those? What guidance do I give them about interacting with everyone else? Thinking about the particular invisibility of this work, I just picked a couple of quotes because people come to this, a lot of these PAs we talked to kind of tumbled into this job in one way or another. So this first quote here is from someone who supports this disabled person in her home life as well. In fact, she's someone who's funded on a NHS continuing care arrangement. And she's also a family member. So when they're not at work, they have a very close and dynamic, chatty relationship. But she says here, I've just known how to be like a silent carer when she's at work, to take a step back, recognising that when she's at work, the disabled person she's supporting has a work persona, and she's in a different role herself, and that means their relationship's different. In a quite different case, as happened to a handful of people we talked to, they applied for this job, PA, and because they'd been an office PA before, and then realised it wasn't quite what they thought. And whereas as an office PA, this person had been working for a training director, there she was, second in command, quite important, yes, and now she's being told to filter herself out into the background. So it's a difficult one to negotiate, and disabled people, of course, they've got very differing views how they conceive of their workplace PA, how they want their role to be. But that workplace within the workplace, it's not in a vacuum. There are other people around in the organisation. So to a certain extent, this PA has to be made visible, if only to explain who they are. And I've just given you a flavour of what 3 different disabled people have said. This long quote is more about, let's pretend they really are invisible. I don't feel the need to introduce them to you. They're nothing to do with you. Other people feel very differently, that their PA perhaps should be a little bit more engaged. My PA has a voice, and that's a person actually whose PA has some relevant skills to this disabled person's workplace. And that's another boundary issue about when you might overstep and become too visible and perhaps overstep into their role. And then the third quote is that, they're kind of an extension of me, but they're their own person. And just to finish would be to say that meetings, one of the things we're finding is what happens in meetings is a classic example of how difficult this is. Is your presence acknowledged as a PA? If it isn't, what happens if that meeting's confidential? What are people thinking about you there? And what have you got a confidentiality agreement? All that. But also when you might contribute to a meeting. And PAs talk about using cues. So they'll think about the disabled person's demeanour. Are they kind of inviting me to join in here or not? How formal is this meeting? If it's very formal, I probably shouldn't. And when they go to events with the disabled person they work with, someone said, well, I if there's no name badge, I know my place. So that's it. And so this is the final slide I want to show you. It just has really made us think at the workforce level, if we need this army of PAs, there are some real supply and demand issues there. Raising awareness of the role. So many PAs have said to us, I just kind of fell into it, for one reason or another. But there are people, someone I interviewed just yesterday who retired early a couple of years ago, really missed the work environment, wanted something to do but not full time. She's now a PA for somebody. Somebody else has got young children. It fitted well for her with flexibility. She's learning. She's in an academic setting, learning a bit about that. Might want to be a research assistant in the future. There are people who perhaps we haven't thought about as being part of this world who might want it. And also to raise awareness for disabled people who think, well, I can't work because how can I do it? I don't just need an adapted laptop, I need a person. And then in the workplace, people have told us they really would like a bit of guidance. Everybody does this role differently, but because of the unique challenges of the workplace, it perhaps needs a bit more thought. And the central source of support was there just because it's a very intense personal relationship, and unlike some other types of PA, there aren't really the support networks for people, or where they go if they have a problem, or that's what people are saying to us. So I'll finish with the usual disclaimer and information on how to get hold of us.
Thanks very much for that, Jane. We've got a couple of minutes for questions. If there are any questions for Jane, gentleman here.
Hi, Simon Fish from Choose Care. Fascinating on the whole personal assistance market, general fascinating anyway. I've got 2 kind of questions. You said hidden market. is very well hidden. Have you got any idea of scale, just from your brief study? It's just impossible to tell.
Absolutely none. So that's one of the fascinating things, and no one can tell us. So, for instance, I've all access to work's been going for 20 years, and there are figures on how many people are supported, but there's no breakdown as to whether they got, adaptations or a person, or so you just can't find that out.
The related question is that you mentioned people paying for this through direct payments and stuff. What on earth is the legal status of these workplace PAs? You mentioned like swipe cards and stuff. It's like, who are they employed by? They're employed by, I mean, it varies, some of them might be self-employed and therefore different status, but are they, it must be very difficult for the workplace, as you mentioned, to adjust to who is this person. If they're not employed by the employer, what is their status on site, health and safety and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Typically they're not. I think we've found, one case which was a disability organisation was employing, they had 2 people with workplace PAs. One person, had their own arrangement, and they actually employed the other person for complicated reasons to do with everybody's funding arrangements. The only other case was one person was using an agency. The only other case where people had access to an organisation resource was in a university, which was somebody who was he was teaching part-time, which is how he was eligible for our study, but he was also doing a PhD, so he could kind of hitch onto the university's bank of people for disability support. But that created other issues because he couldn't guarantee who he was going to get, and he has a visual impairment, so it was really important for him that he had someone who knew how to navigate the library catalogue and things, and not everybody did, so that raised a bit. But mostly people have hired people themselves, and some people who, we talk to people where their relationships are going well and some were not going well, some on the point of breakdown, some people have had breakdowns in the past, and some people, it's a very vulnerable job.
Lady at the back.
Caroline, no research kind of researching it. I was wondering what your opinion is on registration. Should this group be registered professionally?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, they're personal assistant. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because some of them are already working as a PA, and they're coming, they're accompanying that person wherever they go. Others have just, they've literally been, somebody's found a friend, somebody's found I mean, there are a whole set of issues like that in relation to training as well, and that kind of, there's everybody's kind of navigating their own bespoke arrangement here. It feels very interesting.
Lady there.
Hi, my name's Nicola Maskery. I'm co-production and research governance lead for Islington Council. This presentation has really, really resonated with me. I'm a disabled person. I use a support worker, have done for 13 years. Funnily enough, in my very first job was at Sheffield Hallam University as well. My employers have been largely very supportive, but pretty much every single issue that you've raised in your presentation and you've raised in your questions have come up in my 13 years of using support workers. I'd be interested to see why did you just pick physical disability? I mean, mine's for a mental health issue, but the issues are very much the same.
Well, the proposal was written before I joined, but my understanding is because there had been no research at all on that group. So that's why. Is that right, Yvonne?
Yeah, would you go with, it's underserved anyway.
Yeah.
But we knew that there was some research around
and learning disability.
Certainly further learning disability. So we wanted to concentrate more on physical disability because we knew there was just nothing.
I know I certainly found for mental health when I was first looking for one. You try the agencies, and unless it's a physical disability or a learning disability, you've got no chance because the people don't really understand what your needs are. So you then have to resort to recruiting friends, family, that kind of thing. And then it comes up with the whole question that you said about registration, what you've raised about supervision and support. and professional relationships as well. If you do decide to expand this research in future and extend it to mental health services, I'd be really interested to.
Perhaps if you have an email, a card or something, you could give us
I'll give you
that.
my contact details.
Yeah, lovely. Brilliant.
And lady at the back, I'll let you have the last question.
I was just interested to know sorts of organisations people are working for. Do you notice that, have you noticed any particular groups of people seem to work with more frequently than others? I mean, I'm guessing academia might be one.
I mean, it is a small study, so we haven't looked systematically at work plan. I'd say when you're trying to find a hidden workforce, the recruitment's been our biggest challenge. I mean, our first few participants were working in disability organisations because that was one of our first ways of trying to find people. And then we thought, well, we've got to widen this out. So we started looking at, we looked at employers who class themselves as disability competent. We partly looked at universities because we knew universities. We actually, we did a bit of snowballing. So, where we had interviewed one person, asked them if they knew anybody else who had a workplace PA and so on. So it's one of the reasons I'm really pleased that we did get a good range because, we don't have the quantitative information, we don't have the information about these PAs to know the answer to your question. So I think for us, just to try and to pull in people who are working in all sorts of different situations gives more strength to the sort of common themes that we're finding regardless of where we are. But I can't really answer the question from the
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to all our speakers. And I'd particularly like to thank you all for coming to this conference today and for supporting the School of Social Care Research. I think it's a really good opportunity for researchers and academics to meet with practitioners and to meet with people who use services and to understand how we can all help one another to advance the research agenda so that we are getting evidence-based practice, which hopefully will make services better and deliver better outcomes. So thank you to our speakers and thank you to all for coming today. Goodbye.